Okay, so what I want to do now is in our Firestore database, here we have a collection of users. So now what we want to do is create a collection of messages or chats. So what we need to do is implement that in the code. So it's quite similar to what we've done in our user controller. So navigating to the lib Firebase folder in here, we have a user controller file in here. So in the user controller file, we get access to a user's collection, and then we have a function here that adds the user to the Firestore. In here, we have a user ref, which is essentially the doc for each chat that we have. Then we set the doc and we update the data in the doc itself. And the merge through is only for whenever a user logs in, each time the server timestamp or the last online gets updated. So what we need to do now is create a new file called messagecontroller.ts in here. And in message controller, what I want to do is just copy this across into message controller. What we can also do is get this Firestore and put it in our index file, but I'll just leave it in here for now. So first of all, we want to get Firestore, and then we want to get access to our Firestore app, which is coming from the index.ts file, and just import that in. And then what we also want to do is create a chats collection and not a users collection this time. And again, we need to import collection from Firestore also. And then instead of users, I want to name this as chats in here. And the first function we want to create is a new chat. So it's going to be a function in here. So export const of create new chat, which is going to be an async function. And this takes in a few arguments, but we'll leave them for now. So initially, what we want to do is console.log the chat that gets passed into here. So what we now need to do is, if you look into our app on the browser, essentially when I navigate to a user, so if I click on here and I navigate to, for example, Yoda, then this will navigate to the relevant URL. But what I have done is created a new user in here, which is another account of myself. So let's go ahead and navigate to that. So as you can see here, we have my user ID in here. And then this is a chat that should be created in the Firestore chats collection. So what we want to do is whenever we type in here and submit the form, then we want the message to add to the chat collection as a doc in there. So what we want to do is get access to the message import, and then with the function we've just created, which is the create new chat, it receives a chat in here, or a message we could rename it as, because that's what it will be. And then essentially we just want to console log the message for now. So if I save this, and then when we submit, we want to get the value of message and pass that into the create new chat function, which is essentially this function we've created here. So let's copy that. And when we submit now, we have the e.prevent default. And straight after that, what I want to do is invoke the create new chat function, passing in the message. And what we need to do is import this as well from the message controller. So because this is an async function, we need to handle that in the message import as well. So this will be an async function, and what we want to do is await the create new chat and pass in the message in here. So what I also want to do is define this as a message constant in here, and instead of calling it message, I'll call it message input. And then we just want to console log the message input after the message is sent as well. So now if I save all, and what we need to do is test this out in the browser. So if I inspect and go into my console, what I want to do is when I submit on the form, so if I type in something, so I'll type in hello, press enter. Now we can see the message is being sent. So what we now need to do is hook this up to Firebase. So essentially we want to add a new collection in here of chats, and inside chats we're going to have the documents in here, and inside the documents we're going to have the messages stated on a collection in here. So let's go ahead and do that now. So instead of create new chat or message, we're going to pass in a few arguments this time. So if we go into create new chat in here, and there's a few things we want to log out. So if I just delete this, and first thing that we need to do is get access to the current user is the first thing we need to do. So whoever's logged in, that's who we need to get access to. And then we want to get access to the recipient or the person we're messaging. So get access to the recipient. Then we want to get access to the message via the Firestore. So let's go ahead and do that first. So the first one is quite simple. We first of all defined an auth in index.ts, which is here. So we want to get the auth and then we want to get access to the current user. So we can do that quite easily. So it will be the const of current user, I'm going to call it, is equal to auth.current user, and we need to import this from the index file. And I want to first of all have optional chaining in there to say if there is an auth, then we want to access the current user. So that one's fine. So we can tick this one off. The second one, what we need to do here is create a function for getting the recipient user. So what I'll do is I'll create a function for this, which is going to be get a single user from the Firestore. So we will leave that one for now. And then we want to get access to the message via the Firestore. So first of all, we need to create the message, and then we want to get a chat ref to this. So it's going to be const chat ref or single chat ref is equal to, and we want to get access to a specific document in here. So it will be doc from Firestore, and then the first argument will be the Firestore, and then the second argument will be the collection name. In our case, it's going to be the chats, and then the message UID will come from the URL params, which is essentially this ID here. So the person that I speak to and the person that is the recipient of the chat. So for example, if I click on Darth Vader, what will happen is we will get Darth Vader's ID in here, and then that will be appended onto the URL in here. So that is the ID we will need to get in the Firestore. So the document will be added in here. So if we go back to our code again, I need to import the doc, and then this will change. So we need to change this to the router ID. So we will pass this in as an argument. So I'm going to name this router ID, and we need to access that in the params. So going back into our message input file in here, I want to get access to the params, which is quite simple to do. It's const params is equal to use params, and that comes from next navigation, like so. And then what we want to do is we want to pass in the argument of params.id in here, which essentially is grabbing the ID from the URL, and then that's being used as the router ID as well. So these are the two arguments that I need. What I'm going to do in here is create new chat. If we go into it, I'm going to rename this to message text, which essentially is going to be a string that we pass in. And first of all, we're getting access to the current user, which is fine. We need that. We also need access to the router ID. So we want to check the type for this. And the type for the params ID is going to be a string. So if we go into here, we just define the type for this, which is essentially a string. So we have access to the message text and router ID. We want to get access to the recipient user, which we've established, and we're going to create a function to get a single user from the Firestore. That is handy because we can use that function across the app. Then we want to get access to the message or the chat via Firestore. So we go into our Firestore, into the chats collection, and then we access the doc that has the specific router ID inside. So now what we did was in the user controller, we did the same thing, but we did a set doc in here. So we're going to do the same thing again. So let me just copy this, and it's the same functionality in the message controller, but there's a slight difference. So in here, we want to import set doc from Firestore. Instead of users ref, it's going to be chats ref. And now what we need to do is define an object in here of how we want the structure to be. So essentially what I want to do is first of all create the object, and let's work through it together. So what I want is a link, which means that we need to get the link from the URL, which is essentially the router ID. So that's the first thing I want to define, which is a link. Then I want to define an object of messages, and in this object I want to pass in an array of messages. So I'm going to type in message is equal to multiple objects inside here. So every time a user adds a message, this whole object will get populated, and it should occur straight after, continuing and going forward like so. So in the message, first thing I want is the message body, which essentially is the message text being received from here. So we need that, which is important. We also need a created at time. So this will tell us the created at time, which essentially is a new date. So if I save that, we also need the message sender, which is the person sending the message. So that is essentially the current user dot email, I'm going to say. And then what I also want is the message sender ID, in case we need the ID for anything. in here, which is essentially current user ID. And then I'm just going to put a comment in here, which is saying that this is only used for the first index of the array. So essentially what we want to do is get the message recipient details. So this is only used for the first index of the array, and all I want to do is get the message recipient details. So instead of message sender now, it's going to be message recipient, and that's going to be the recipient details that we get from here. And then we also need the message recipient ID as well. So I'm just going to paste that in here as well. And for now, I'm just going to put in a string in here, and then also in here I'm just going to put another string in here just to satisfy it for now. And if I save, that's fine. So what happens is we have a create new chat function, which is an async function that takes in message text, which is a string, and it also takes in the router ID, which is coming from the params object. Then we get access to the current user, which is whoever's logged into the application. We now need to get access to the recipient user, but we'll leave that in for now. This is the functionality that will get added to the Firestore. So what will get added is the link, so we can access the link for the message in case you wanted to link out to another route. Then we have the messages in this object in here, and in here we want to have a message in the shape of this. So each time we type in a message, this message should get added, and essentially when there's an update we should do merge of true. So if I go into the message input in here, I now have this send message function. So what I now need to do is create the new chats. So in this send message function, I want to make a few changes. So I'm going to delete this and the console log as well, because we'll be able to check the Firestore database this time. I'm going to delete the async in here. And essentially when I do a form submit, I want to prevent default behavior. We want to create the new chat. And then what we also want to do is set the message text back to the empty string in here. And I also want to add a guard clause in here. So I want to check if message is equal to an empty string, then we want to return. So essentially, if nothing is typed in, then we don't want to invoke this function in here. So that is all set. So if I save this now, go into our browser, we want to refresh the page. And now the page is refreshed. I want to type in hello once again and press enter. So now we can see that the message text has disappeared when I pressed enter. So now we want to see if the document has been created in the chats collection. So at the minute, we don't have a chats collection. So all we need to do is go into rules. And then if we go back into data, we should see the chats collection populate. So in here, we can see now we have a chats collection, which is the document of this UID for the person I'm speaking to. So let's just double check that is correct. So it ends in CB2, which is correct. So that has created a document. If I go into here, we have the structure. So essentially we have a message that says hello. The recipient is here, which is the strings that I've manually typed in, but we need to fix that. We have the message sender, which is myself, and the message sender ID also, which is myself. There is one caveat though. So if I typed in another message, so I'll say goodbye this time, the expected behavior would be that it would add another message in here. So it will be message one, message two, and so on. So instead of hello, it will say goodbye underneath. But what happens is if I submit this and press enter and go to here, as you saw, the message just got replaced. So that is because we are using setdoc. So we need to use setdoc to update the message, but we need it as an array of objects. So the way to do that in Firebase is using something called an array union. So let's go ahead and implement that. So if we go back into create new chat in here, where we have the message object in here, what I want to do is wrap it in something called an array union. And then this wraps the object in parentheses like so. And then we also need to import this from Firebase. So now if I save, essentially what an array union is updates elements in an array. So this object is now an array. So each time we submit this form event, a new object like this gets added onto this array union in here. So that is a handy feature from Firebase that is good in Firebase 9. So let's just check to see if that works on the application. So if I now type in a new array in here, so we have the goodbye, and now I want to type in a new message. So I'm going to say hello again this time. Press enter. So now we have hello again, but this time you can notice here we have an index of an object inside the message. So now message has turned from an object into an array of objects. So if I expand this and type in something again, what I should see is an index of the number 1 added underneath. So let's go ahead and type something in here. So I'm going to say hi Imran and press enter. So now, as you can see here, now we have an array of messages, which is handy because what we will do is map through it to show the list of messages in the message body. So now that functionality is working and that is all set. So what we now need to do is finally get the message recipient details. So now let's create the function for the recipient details, which is get access to the recipient user in here. So what I'm going to do is create a function called get single user from Firestore. But what I'll do is I'll add that into the user controller because it's more relevant in there. So underneath all of this, I'm going to say export const of get single user from Firestore. And what we want to do is pass in a user ID. So again, this is a async function, and I'm going to close this off for now. And then what we need to do is fetch the details for the single user. So let's go ahead and do that. First off, what I want to do is do a guard clause. So if no user ID, then I want to return. Then I want to get access to the user ref, but instead this time what I'm going to do is add template literals in here. So it's going to be /users/ the user ID. So this is the wildcard user ID. So let's go ahead and wrap this in curly braces and close this off here. So essentially I want to go access the Firestore, but instead of the chats collection, we want to access the users collection, cycle through that and get the relevant user based on the user ID that we pass into here. Then we want to get the user doc. So that's going to be await get doc, and that is the user ref. So the user snap is fine. And then what we want to do is get the data for the user snap. So that will be user snap dot data, like so. And then what we want to do is return the user at the end here. So that is how you would get a single user from Firestore. So all we need to do now is pass in the user ID. So if we copy this and go into the message controller, and at the top here, we want to get access to the recipient user details. So I'm just going to say const recipient details is equal to await, and the function is get single user from Firestore. And because the router ID is the recipient's user's ID, we can just pass in the router ID like so. And we just need to import get single user from Firestore. And again, it's awaiting it because this is an async function in here. So if we go back into our message controller now, we have successfully done all of these comments. So I'm just going to delete them out. So adding comment is quite handy because you can map out what we need to do inside the function. So now I have access to the recipient details. What I want to do is, instead of the message recipient, I'm just going to console log what the recipient details are, just so we can see what we get back and see if it is correct. So now if I save everything and type in a message, so I'm going to say hey again and press enter. So essentially here we have access to the recipient details, and what we have is an email, last online, name, photo ID and UID, which is essentially the same information we have stored in our Firestore database. So in here, if we go into users, the recipient in this case is going to be this one ending CB2. So if we cross-reference that, and you can see here the UID ends in CB2, and just to double check that is correct, this is the recipient user in here, so that is correct. What I want to do now is get access to the information. So I need the UID, which is the ID, and then the recipient email. So if I do that now in the code, so instead of the string that I have defined in here, we can just do message recipient is recipient details dot email, and then again recipient details dot ID in here, or dot UID in here. So now that is the create new chat function complete, and we are now adding successfully messages to our Firestore database, and we have also created a chat collection. So now what I want to do next is, when I submit a chat saying something on here and press enter, I want it then to populate onto here, and we also need to get the recipient details in here also. So that's what we will do next.